Hello,
Hey everyone.
back with it. So, myself and Gelb are going to have a wee chat about failure
Yeah.
and perspective and how it relates to this week. And we would love to hear other people's opinions as well on their experiences of
Get
failure.
the Slack team up.
Good idea to keep monitoring
Follow
that.
along.
So, as a starting point, failure in what kind of context? What are we talking about here? Why did we pick this as something that we should maybe discuss in front of viewers during the Zero to Revenue Challenge?
Well, so, sorry.
Typing as we go.
Yeah. Failure is this kind of weird thing because I think it's both, it is really important for you to embrace it, but the way that the use of the word failure is also like, it's one of these things that you're supposed to celebrate because you're doing the tough job, right? So yeah, you want to embrace failure. You want to encourage failure because life's tough and you got to get through it. And so I feel like in some ways that also that defeats the purpose in some ways as well.
Tokenism.
Yeah, it is a bit tokenism. Yeah. Andy last night actually made a really good point about failure. Is it failure when you disprove a hypothesis? No, it's not. It's
right.
It's you. That means most of science is a failure.
Yeah.
Disproving a hypothesis is helpful.
Means there are then less choices of what the reality is.
But I think so. Like the use of the term failure is a massive oversimplification, but at the same time, it's useful as that oversimplification to try and get people out of the mindset of perfectionism. And I think that maybe is the root of it. Like, everything has to be perfect. No one can see that I have any problems because otherwise I will be considered a failure. So maybe that's why a lot of people use the term or use the kind of phrase, you need to fall in love with failure, you need to embrace failure, you need to fail fast, all that good stuff. It's just to kind of remind you to say, like, you're going to mess up, and you might think that that you're messing up, but actually it's called learning.
So this is my problem with
the
it.
Phrase.
Yeah, I don't find it useful. I find it actually only increases my anxiety or worry around, well, this is what my output should be. It's measuring myself against past me or other people, or there's a bar. And I think part of that is that we don't get taught, or I didn't learn how to cope with failure during school or what that looked like. And it's all about building resilience, isn't it? So how do we know, why is it even a thing? Like, why is failure the right word, or is it part of a journey? And I think if you hear stories about, well, I embraced failure, I leaned into it, then as a perfectionist, it's very easy to hear that and think, oh, well, I'm already failing because I'm not leaning into the failure. So you're just adding fuel to the fire of, right, well, I need to hustle more, I need to learn from my failings and talk about it. And like, is that useful? Is it useful context to work within? I'm not sure it is.
So from a meta perspective, I guess what we're saying is that in true millennial fashion, falling in love with failure is problematic as a phrase.
Yeah.
But if we can kind of push that to a side and try and get to the heart of at least what we're trying to mean by that, it's that kind of being okay with not being perfect and learning what good enough looks like, and then understanding when to move on from a particular challenge or a particular problem so that you can learn from it and get on to something else.
But it's different for everybody, right? So it might be perfect, and that might be the way that you frame it and understand it. Or it could just be, well, this was my goal and I didn't meet my goal.
Yeah,
so therefore I failed to meet my goal.
Two different things.
I think they can be two different things, because my goal might not have been perfectionism. So as an example, it might not be I wanted to work out 7 days a week. Maybe I only wanted to work out 5, but I only worked out 3. Is that failure?
Yeah.
It's not meeting a goal. So I think sometimes failure to me can feel like, or where I personally struggle and internalize it, is because I'm a goal setter and I have to have a vision and be aiming for something. When my reality doesn't match what that vision was,
what happens?
That's really tough. That's where, but I was so focused on this being, so it's as if maybe I have lots of different potential endpoints.
Yeah.
And I got to an endpoint that I wasn't expecting. I was expecting endpoint A and I reached endpoint B.
Yeah.
And actually, maybe it's just as good as, maybe it's just as okay as endpoint A, but it's different. But to me, that can feel like a failure because it wasn't where I was focused on.
And does that feeling of failure then impact you in wanting to set goals going forward?
Yeah, good question.
Maybe we can articulate this in an example. So you are working on a customer acquisition thing, and you want to sign up 10 customers today, and you sign up 2.
Yep.
Then how are you feeling tomorrow, and are you going to try and set another goal?
Yeah, like am I likely to avoid that particular task and change tack to something else? Yes. I think it can depend. That's where reflection for me comes into it. So why did I not meet my goal? What were the contributing factors? Was it the right goal to set in the first place? And that's something that I've struggled with and reflected upon is, as a goal setter, you have to make sure you're making the right goals to begin with. Otherwise, I'm stacking myself up for failure, which is then really hard to kind of overcome. And you need momentum and you need energy to kind of keep bashing through. I've never met my goals, and that can be really draining. So I think the reflection point is, did I set the right goal? What were the barriers? What were the challenges? So when we do our stand-ups like this morning, what are the potential challenges? What could get in your way? What support do you need? And I think then that helps hone the goal setting. So maybe it was right to aim for 10 customers. Maybe I identify what the barriers were or get support and I can overcome them. Or maybe I realized, well, 10 customers that wasn't the right goal to set, and this is why. And I can readjust and reevaluate.
That's great in theory, but like, how does it actually feel when do you ever kind of get to the point when you're like, 10 customers was probably the wrong goal. I should have realized that. I now realize that, so that means that good job me. I've now learned something.
As in, do I feel that positively about it? No, I probably still say, well, it might not have been the right goal, but I should have been able to get those extra 8 customers. That's a mindset, isn't it? That's your internal monologue. And I think that's what can be so damaging, is that we're all failing. So the micro failures, right? So the things that you promise yourself that you do, that you don't do. Even if it's as simple as, I'll stack the dishwasher straight after dinner, and then you don't, and you sit and watch an extra episode of Netflix. That's a micro failure, right? So the more that we do that, we are challenging our kind of self-belief. And if you think about it as an emotional bank account, we're taking money out of a bank account. So tomorrow when I set my work goal, I believe in myself less. But then the flip side is also true. So the more we make those micro achievements, so I don't know if I moved something that I needed to move from one place to another, and I actually got up off the couch and I did that thing, then you're like, check, like I achieved something and I did it. So those micro achievements matter as well. So I think it is about like what's the internal voice saying, and how am I speaking to myself about that failure, or is it a learning? And I think Andy's point last night is really important. And if I really work at practicing that, like, what did I learn from this? Not superficially, oh, well, I can talk about my failure in terms of my learnings, but I'm still telling myself that I failed. That's not as useful, that's not as beneficial.
And then what does time have to do with it, just in terms, like, how does that affect it? I'm thinking, like, you've realized that you failed, whatever, again, that means, but you've realized that you failed over a longer point of time versus a shorter period of time.
Maybe that's just difficult because you've had more time to think about what you wanted that reality to be, right? So it's like playing poker. You're not meant to say, well, like, I've bet this much so far, so I'm just going to stick to my guns. But it can feel like that when you've set a really big goal in the future. And maybe for quite a long while, we've had things telling us, well, this is maybe not right. You're maybe not on the right path. This maybe isn't the right thing. And I think definitely as a founder or as a leader, that's the position you're in, is that you are the person who's thinking long term. You are the person with that vision and those goals. You have to be able to think like that. But then the downside and the challenges and the fact that so many founders suffer with poor mental health is that you're constantly having to live the reality of, I'm pitching the 5-year vision and this is how I'm going to change your life. And also I don't know how to pay my team tomorrow. And those two realities, I think it's the difference in reality of what you see and what you actually are living, I think that's where that difficulty lies.
Yeah, I guess when I was growing up, I don't know where I heard this, but I always had heard that compartmentalizing yourself is not healthy or it's not a good thing. But I actually think it might be.
You find it useful?
I don't know. I find it really useful.
What is compartmentalizing? What's that to you?
Well, like to me, it's like it's doing that same thing. Like, oh, okay, we're building a product. We're working pretty well. We're not sure if the product's the right product, and the bank account's going to go into the red tomorrow. So have to think about all these different things, and if you allowed yourself to think about all of them at the same time, you wouldn't be able to get anything done. And so I wasn't good at that certainly before while I was at university, and I would let things get to me and just take me off on tangents. And now things do still get to me, but I actually, like, I've noticed myself getting better of saying, like, oh, okay, you're going to have to pay that tomorrow and you don't know how to pay it tomorrow. Okay, well, you have a day, so it's not worth thinking about literally right now.
Right.
And, you know, otherwise, like, it's like sleepless nights. You know, you're going to have sleepless nights, and what can you do to reduce those sleepless nights? Well, one thing is to try and compartmentalize it. And I don't know if that's healthy or not, but it enables you to get through things a lot quicker. I think as long as you're not pushing it down, and I think that's what a lot of people think of when they think of compartmentalizing it, is like, oh, I see this issue, I'm going to move it over there and then never come back to it. Yep. And that's not what I mean. I mean more like, you know, this is an issue, and I'm going to now start spiraling and think about this, even though I know there is no way that this can be resolved because I'm waiting to hear back on someone, or I'm waiting to hear about something else.
Fear is irrational, right?
It is. It's super irrational.
So you can talk, and I think that's the important thing about what you've said, is that you have recognized in yourself this particular method really works for me and it's healthy for me. And I think that's where you have to take the time, right? We have to understand that at different stages and with different challenges, we are equipped to either deal with that failure or not. And I think each time we pick something up that we learn, well, this really worked for me, or this was really self-destructive and I need to not handle or mishandle or mismanage failure like that in the future.
Well, one thing also, just as co-founders of a business, especially a business that has to pitch, right? We have to pitch ourselves to investors all the time. I do find it difficult because as you can tell, I talk a lot, and I like to make sure that you understand everything that I'm talking about. So to hold back and to not go into detail about things, not in a manipulative way, but just in a not so as I don't overwhelm you, I then get very worried about coming across as not open and not honest, even though that's actually not probably an effective way to get investment, right? Is to say, right, I'm going to tell you about all the problems that we're dealing with right now, just so that you know. And I'm hoping that you're going to listen to that and be like, wow, they're on top of these problems. They know how to fix them. That's often not what they want to hear. But on the flip side, you're always having to sell or highlight the vision in terms of what it is that you're building. And then obviously go into detail about how you're not there yet. I do find that there's oftentimes quite a fine line that it's easy to see why some people jump over that line.
Specifically when it comes to pitching the vision.
Pitching the vision, exactly. Like, look, you need to fake it till you make it in some cases. And by fake, and I don't think it's wrong to fake it till you make it, because we're talking like the whole idea of MVP. That is faking it till you make it. In a lot of ways, you are selling a vision that literally doesn't exist yet, and like that's the only way that companies that cater to large organizations or fast-growing companies, that's what they're selling, and they're certainly selling that to investors. But then when you see things like the Fire Festival, right. which I think is incredibly interesting, fascinating, and and you see like the Elizabeth Holmes story out on the West Coast. You see these examples, these flashpoints of like, fraud, right? But at what point is selling and highlighting what you're doing actually fraud? And I think that people watching those stories, it's very easy to say, well, that is fraud. And it is easy to say that it's fraud with them. But I actually don't think that, I think if you do run a company and if you are pitching and talking to investors, there's a little bit that you hear that you're like, I can kind of see how that happened. You know what I mean?
Isn't it the fact that you're seeing a magnified example of like someone way across the line, but you're saying that I understand the spectrum. I know what the color is.
Exactly.
Right.
So like the Fire Festival, if anybody's seen the Fire Festival documentary on Netflix.
Or see their slide deck, which has been circulating LinkedIn, right?
Exactly.
They're just like, hey, have you seen their pitch deck?
Yeah, exactly. And I looked at their pitch deck.
Have you seen our pitch deck?
Yeah, I looked at their pitch deck and I was like, yeah, okay, that works. I mean, like literally, like, what do you expect? This is the mindset at the beginning of it. What do you expect? They've never done this before. The guy has some background, of course, fraudulent. So we're not talking about the fact that this wasn't true. Taking that out of it. Let's assume that he had this background and stuff like that. And you're like, okay, well, this doesn't exist yet. So literally, if you take a picture of a beach and you say that's what it's going to be, that's not going to help. That's not going to help me as an investor wanting to tie in. So you have to kind of project that, and but you also have to make clear that these are the risks, these are the challenges. But I can see, because I've met founders like this, they are so wrapped up in the vision that they're just convinced it's going to work out. And watching the documentary,
you're like, oh,
I was like,
just too far.
I can see that happening.
So this is what's fascinating, because there are two things that would hold you back from like going on that journey. One would be your own personal values. So what line would you not draw?
Yeah.
Like you would not step over.
Yeah.
And also the team that you have around you.
Sure, exactly.
Because if you know you're a vision maker, and we talked about this yesterday, like when we were talking about on the basic level of just feature creep. Like sometimes we need reined in. Sometimes technical people need to say, that's great for the future. Right now I can only build this and I can build this tomorrow.
Exactly.
Ben mentioned that this morning. He was saying we have 1 week, guys.
Exactly.
This will be what I will be including, and this is your vision for the future. So it depends on the people that you surround yourself with that you can be challenged. And I think in terms of fear of failure, like to bring it back to failure, it's am I all about my ego and my vision and executing on that? And is it then a failure if I get challenged and have to be derailed from that?
Yeah.
Or does success look like to me is like whatever the strongest, best impact is, and that'll be a team approach, it'll be a blended approach. And so that's success, it's not failure. If I think it's my idea or it's nothing, then it's failure if it is derailed.
Yeah, and I think with the Fire Festival, for example, the main guy took advantage of other people's emotions, but also kind of bastardized the whole notion of things are going to go wrong, and so we have to fix them, which is true. Things are going to go wrong, and we got to fix them, and that's how you push through. And there's a lot of interesting information behind that, but that can't be the excuse for everything. And once you move past a certain point, it's just delusion.
Right, because you're exempting yourself from personal responsibility. And
exactly.
like we are all personally, and maybe that's an element of failure.
Yeah.
Do we, and how we react to it? Do we react with shame? Do we react with not talking about it, compartmentalizing it in a negative way? Or do we blame it on an external factor? How much are we able to not own it and say, so the difference between shame and guilt, right? So not own it and say, I failed, therefore I am a bad person, I am wrong, I am rubbish. But guilt being like, oh, I failed because actually I made this call, I made this decision. And so with guilt, you can learn from it. With shame, you can't, because you're living that instead of separating yourself from that feeling. And
when you're talking about like, what's your personal values? What are the personal things about you? I mean, I guess luckily I have more guilt than than anyone I've ever met. I'm pretty good with that. And so if I have an inclination that I'm not trying and I'm not being intellectually honest, I think I'll then shift and overblow the other side, which is probably not helpful from a founder looking for like large scale investment, because there's a confidence thing which we can go into later in terms of framing. However, from a personal firewall, I know that my mouth will probably save me in making sure that you know that this doesn't exist yet. But like bringing it back, like for the Fire Festival, and maybe we can talk about Kindaba, it's very easy for you to see where another person shifts into delusion. And it's very difficult for you to, it's much easier said than done. So like with Kindaba's still going, and it's still a product, and people are using it every day. Thousands of people are using it all over the world every day. But so I don't mean it necessarily in a product point of view, but in a strategic point of view, our strategy, especially our funding strategy, has failed.
Yeah.
It's failed up until now. And why has it failed? I mean, I think we've never done it before. Perhaps personally, like maybe I wasn't the one to go out and try and get the investment, because maybe I'm not very good at pitching. We did raise, quite a lot of money, but could someone have done it better? Absolutely.
Right, and I say the same about myself. Could I have got us more customers faster? I don't have a background in that kind of growth, and would somebody with that background have then be able to excelled much quicker, and then therefore had a much stronger footing to be able to go out for investment?
And also, like, was the speed a problem? We've been doing this now for about 2 years, like as a company. Have we performed well? Like, have we actually built enough? I think some people watching us would probably say you guys have moved way too slow. You haven't been able to do it very fast. And maybe that's a technical reason. Like maybe from a technical perspective, we weren't focused on the right things at the right time. Maybe it was a distraction. Maybe we were changing the
course and direction.
The course and direction too much. Maybe the fact that we were able to get funding early was a barrier, because it let us take things in a certain direction without forcing us to validate in a different way. There are a bunch of different reasons, and I think every day I just cycle through them all. And also, fundamentally, is the product something that is sustainable and will exist and will be able to fix a problem? Again, we think so.
Yeah,
but we don't know.
And can it be a sustainable business,
right?
Yeah,
exactly.
And that's something that we've seen, especially as Kindaba in the market. We've seen competitors left, right, and centre the past year in particular.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think you're right. It's about, if we're talking about the value of failure, people say learn from your mistakes and on you go. And I think for us, or definitely for me, we're still going through that. We're still recognizing what is it we have learned. Have we necessarily got perspective on that yet? I think for me, it's the difference right now in the reality versus the speed at which we wanted to grow Kindaba and the future that we wanted to create. So things like having the team and having the team culture that we had built up and wanting to grow and develop that team. That was a massive part of failure for me, is the feeling of like we don't have that team anymore. We're not able to work with them every day. We're not creating the things that we wanted to for our customers every day. And that's just because that's not the reality that we wanted. That I struggle with that.
Yeah, sure. And maybe the fact that we were trying to project that reality onto ourselves and that vision, maybe that's what blinded us. And I'm not trying to say this in that this is not a retro in terms of why Kindaba failed, because we're still in it. It's still existing. But these kind of things go through our mind like every day. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is a mistake to do. And also, usually every day, I then see an example of someone using it in a way that makes me feel like, oh, I'm actually really glad that this is here. Like, this is helping me with my family. It seems like someone else is interested in it. But it's that, like, interacting with investors, primarily, this is like the lens that I look at it through. What are you going to achieve this year? We're going to achieve all of this. But again, that's subject to us getting investment, and that's subject to this, that, and the other thing. Okay, we haven't gotten that, so we haven't been able to achieve that. Why haven't you been able to achieve that? And if the answer is, well, we didn't get the investment, so we couldn't spend the money on that, they're like, well, you should have figured out a way regardless. And you're like, well, shit. Yeah. You know, what's the point? What's the point of then raising that money if all you're going to do, and using that as a validation, if all you're going to do is say, well, you should have figured it out. And that's like that external validation, that going back to failure and thinking that you failed or thinking that you haven't been able to do it. A lot of it for me, a lot of the problems are not internal. Maybe I think we're quite different that way.
Yep.
A lot of them are external. It's like, well, what are other people going to think? And in reality, I take myself way too seriously.
Right.
No one gives a crap about what we did. They're not going to remember what our pitch deck said. They're not going to remember, how successful or not successful we were. What I think they will remember is if we're sitting here in 5 years and nothing's changed, they're going to be like, you're just beating a dead horse. Like, why are you doing that?
So that's an interesting conversation that I had recently with a friend and mentor, was about, well, to your point of people aren't going to remember what was in your pitch deck. It's more they'll remember the impact that you made on them. So you know how people say that what people say about you when you leave the room is your brand, right? So
Exactly.
it's not like what you write on LinkedIn, it's not your thought leadership, it's like what people are saying about you. And I think for me, of course, there's that external part. So we're constantly going through this story that we tell ourselves, and I'm sure every founder, every entrepreneur out there is going through waves of, I'm totally worth it and I'm doing the best thing and I'm totally absolutely feeling at life, and this is not working, what am I doing? And then you've got the external features that you pack on, which is, what do other people think if I'm on my third business, or what do other people think if I'm juggling these side projects? And it's just all stories that we tell ourselves about what other people potentially maybe think about us. But I think what we can own and what we can deliver on, and this is what my mentor was saying, was talking about, well, what is your interaction with other people like? What impact are you making and what value are you bringing?
Exactly.
And you will continue to do that no matter what role you're in or what company you're with or what your vision is.
Yeah.
And that definitely helps me recenter, kind of cut away the external, what might people think? What is this journey that I'm on? Well, actually, what difference am I making?
And when you do meet people that seem to have been very successful at crafting that, and at least project,
right?
they project an air of being very comfortable with messing up or moving on. I'm thinking again, Josh Pigford, who you're going to listen to later on, talking about the way he was thinking about failure or pulling the plug on this product. It becomes far less emotional because and you watch them like, I have chosen to no longer go through this thing, so I am actually, it's not that I hate it or anything. I just I don't even remember what we were doing because I've now moved on to this other thing that I'm really excited about. And you say, well, how did you make that connection or that transition? And some people are like, what do you mean?
What transition?
What transition?
Yeah.
I didn't like it anymore. So I'm not wasting my mental energy, doing it. And he was saying he likes to write it up. He likes to write up what he was feeling and why they did this, and that's his catharsis.
Right.
But then after that, I think our conversation about what we were supposed to talk about was about 5 minutes. That was it. So we went on and talked about other things. I long for that clarity. Anyway.
Well, so partly that's it though. We are in our early 30s. We have experienced some failures in our life. We hopefully have a long life yet to live. I'm sure we'll experience more. I will think it's going to be intriguing in years' time. What are we going to look like and feel like looking back? And what does failure look like at different points in your life?
What do you think? What have been your experiences with failure? Do you even like that word? How have you described the learning process, or what are your own personal, hang-ups in order to get through a period where you might think that you're beating a dead horse? What are the self-reflection techniques that you've used? Let us know.
So I am going to help us segue into the next round of what we're going to discuss, which is co-founders. And I think it would be a really interesting point just to describe how we met, why we became co-founders, how Kindaba came to be, and then basically get into the discussions of